I want to challenge the popular opinion on the Ukraine-Russia conflict. With the situation escalating exponentially for over a year, I want to engage an alternate viewpoint with hope to unlock a more objective perspective. There's a lot of pressure on the public and on politicians and business leaders to conform to a defined politically correct position. And I'm concerned that this pressure is distorting reality and fueling the conflict, and consequently causing significantly more harm than good with long-term consequences. Russia has been portrayed as the villain indefinitely, so it's an easy sell to blame them for the conflict with Ukraine. But is it rational? Maybe there are other forces at play that shape this false narrative. It's certainly difficult to be objective due to lack of comprehensive information on this topic. It's virtually impossible now to find sources that either challenge Ukraine's actions or explain Russia's position on what's going on. Surely Ukraine is not so clean. They often don't even respect basic rules of engagement. As a simple example, remember the grain deal that was struck to allow Ukraine to export through the Black Sea. Ukraine leveraged Russia's goodwill and attacked a ship in Russia's port city Sevastopol. Dirty tactics. But when Russia's response was to retract on the grain deal, all blame was placed on Russia instead of where it belonged with Ukraine for playing dirty. Our minds are shaped by how this type of information is presented to us. It's fine to have opinions and take political positions, but it's not fine to manipulate the public and hide factors that could shape different opinion. And certainly not when prospects of similar activities from others raise loud criticism. How can we shamelessly criticize media restrictions in other countries when it's so blatantly practiced within the bounds of our own? The word propaganda has a very negative connotation, and we're quick to use it to demean other countries. Yet, is this not exactly what our government is doing to us right now? We're exposed to one view only, and compelled to think that it's the only truth. We have little access to what Putin is saying and his reasoning. What other countries are debating is not presented unless it's aligned with the American position. And this extends to other information sources. Russian content has been disabled on apps. News headlines are intentionally misleading. Intonation used by newscasters are biased and intended to solicit a very specific anti-Russia emotional response. The extent of all of this censorship is outrageous. We all know that every story has more than one angle and interpretation. And in a society of freedom of expression, there should be no tolerance for intentional censorship. We need to hear what the opposing side is saying, and we shouldn't have to dig for it or wonder about authenticity. It should not be forbidden to hear the full story. I want comprehensive facts and a right to form my own opinion. Besides limited access to information, there is another obstacle: fear of retaliation. People are afraid to challenge the prevailing anti-Russia rhetoric. When pressure to conform is so strong, it starts the vicious cycle where you only hear one side of the story articulated, so it becomes even further ingrained. A very dangerous dynamic. And US is certainly leading the path of the discourse. For whatever political interests US feels justifies the chosen position, I think it's a mistake. If US stayed out of the conflict and didn't pressure other nations to conform, the conflict could have fizzled out with much less trauma. But as things continue to get fueled by weapons and money and megaphones, the fire only intensifies. And how does it end? US is not very good at resolving conflicts, just starting them. US has spent over $100 billion on this war so far, and a lot of those billions are direct arms spending. This is an insane amount of money that will leave blood on the hands of those that give it and support it. We already face crime, homelessness, hunger, recession, disease. Is it really responsible to instigate and fuel a major global conflict? Zelensky expects US support, and he continues to demand it, all while making no efforts at diplomacy with the allegedly offending nation. This conflict did not come about out of thin air. It has been festering for years and came to a head, and I believe it precipitated into a war due to irresponsible involvement of the US government. Ukraine has made no efforts at diplomacy. There appears to be no interest to negotiate any agreements. It's not in their interests. President Zelensky appears to want to leverage this mess as an opportunity to take back more than he is entitled to, plus force his way into the NATO club. He's managed to position US government in the middle of the conflict, so they can pressure Europe into compliance for him. Not a bad play for Zelensky, but not such a great place for US to be in the middle of another international conflict. America's bad habit that typically backfires. Biden is playing right into it. Maybe he feels it helps his popularity. Maybe it's a common thread between Biden and Zelensky. Posturing positions to win popularity contests. Biden working to secure his re-election, and Zelensky working on his celebrity status in his popular olive outfits, beating his fists against his chest and posing as a martyr. I imagine it's not lost on everyone that Zelensky is an actor. Literally, an actor that played president in a comedy show that he's now living out. Too many parallels not to be disturbed by it. His passion and energy is not much different than his TV persona, so he's had a lot of practice. It's an actor's skill set to solicit emotions, to grab their audience, to control and direct viewers' minds to feel what they want us to feel. So I take Zelensky's passion with a lot of skepticism. It feels like an act in his now very sick reality, where he's playing with real lives, including lives of his own people. Zelensky embraced a tactic where at every opportunity he points the finger to blame Putin or Russia. No evidence, no facts, just immediate reaction to point and lay blame. He anchors his audience in his interests, and the burden moves to Russia to prove their innocence. It sets up a false perception that's hard to break. Zelensky also relentlessly complains that he isn't getting enough support, not enough weapons. $100 million won't be enough. He will never be enough. He wants everyone to get stuck in this war so no one has a graceful out. Zelensky needs to start taking ownership for his war. This is not an American war, and his demands and expectations that we continue to support and fund need to end. Zelensky's no-compromise approach is a suicide mission. He wants what he calls absolute victory. But what does that mean? And at what cost? He's sacrificing people for extra time in the spotlight to play out his TV persona. There are real and substantial reasons on both sides for why this conflict has reached its current form. Ukraine is by far not an innocent victim, and Russia by far not a ruthless killer. Anyone's desire to simplify matters to either extreme is misled. And as time passes, the situation gets even more tangled. The ways to end this war are getting increasingly more complicated. One thing for sure is that without proper dialogue and negotiations, the impact of the war will mushroom. So Zelensky's refusal to hold diplomatic talks with Russia is obscene. To end any conflict, there must be constructive discourse, and compromise must remain on the table. The senseless rhetoric that Russia should only be dealt with by force is dangerously and recklessly idealistic. Ultimatums and unreal demands are non-starters and only prolong the conflict and impair outcomes. To say no dialogue shall be had until all Ukrainian demands are met is outrageous. For example, to demand Crimea be handed back to Ukraine is preposterous. I want to speak specifically to that topic at another time, because this peninsula and its origin is extremely relevant and near and dear to my heart. I know I'm not alone with this skeptical view on the situation. Unfortunately, not enough people and organizations are willing to articulate similar views. For reasons noted, it's not politically correct or appropriate to challenge the anti-Russia stance. It's an expectation to label Russia as the aggressor and remain part of the herd. But maybe more people should dare to challenge the popular opinion, demand more facts and objectivity, not be afraid to not conform. It's natural to hope that US government is taking a position that is in the best national interest. But is it really? Is it in our interests to burn bridges and make enemies? Can we really predict all the dominoes that will fall from getting on Zelensky's train? A lot of actions these days are justified in the name of democracy, which I find increasingly scary. Democracy in and of itself is not a silver bullet. It's a system that's not concrete and has many flaws. And how well is our model democracy really working? Not super, I would say. Our choice for president is dumber, and elections are decided in courts. Our parties refuse to work together and sabotage each other out of principle. We're not free of human rights issues. Our news media is a series of talk shows with little substance, and the list goes on. And of course, it could be much worse, but let's not pretend we have a steady foot to stand on when bashing other system of governing and activating destruction under the flag of democracy. And regardless of what's optimal, things don't change overnight. We have to recognize the current state, reflect on history and trajectory before butting in with unfit ideology that does more harm than good. And when support for Ukraine is justified by shiny democratic principles, let's not miss some basics. Per the Global Corruption Index, Ukraine and Russia rank pretty close, 32 versus 29 out of 100. For reference, US is 67 and Germany is 80. Another interesting statistic is in the worldwide governance indicators. The measure of political stability and absence of terrorism is pretty horrendous for Ukraine, significantly worse than that of Russia. So when accusations of terrorism get thrown around, maybe the shoe fits better on the other foot. So is it really in our national interests to arm Ukraine and prolong this conflict? It feels that it's dangerous and not in anyone's interests. Perhaps Russia was never the enemy it's being made out to be. Maybe their goal was protecting their own national interests, whether it's the ever-expanding NATO or assaults on their citizens within borders of Ukraine, or protecting their own land, that is Crimea. Hard to say, isn't it? And are we really ready for a perpetual war? Maybe it's time to cut our losses, stop picking sides, and let the pieces fall where they may. If you enjoyed hearing my thoughts, please subscribe to this channel. And feel free to leave a comment with your thoughts or suggestions. До свидания.